Hello, and welcome to the Better Business Podcast brought to you by Employsure. I'm your host, Lee Johnston, and in this series, we'll be tackling some of the big issues in small business with the industry's brightest minds. In this episode, we unpick the motivations of millennials, their behaviour and expectations, but more importantly, we examine what small business owners and employers can do to recruit, manage, and retain them. But firstly, why are we talking about millennials at all? Because they're going to account for 75% of the Australian workforce by 2025. Which means that if they aren't your colleagues, employees, or bosses already, they soon will be. Meanwhile, less than half of millennials believe that business has a positive impact on society. Clearly, there are some issues here that we need to address. To help us discuss the world of millennials and how to manage them, I talk with Katie Acheson, the CEO of Youth Action and one of Australia's leading advocates for young people and youth services. And I also catch up with Evan Goodman, a serial entrepreneur, management expert and business mentor who, for more than 30 years, has helped businesses grow, scale and manage change. I have to be honest, I wasn't sure of the direction of this episode, but Katie and Evan were fantastic. They blew me away with their insight and their expertise. They went way beyond the generic insights into millennial behaviour to really offer some concrete tips and strategies that small business owners can apply today. We talked about the importance of onboarding and having a solid induction program for young workers, why it's important to establish your business values, and how the team at Youth Action use the daily newspaper crossword to engage their millennial workers. It's a great episode. We cover a lot of territory filled with practical tips you can use in your business. Before we jump in, I just want to add a disclaimer that yes, we are talking in very general terms about a very large and diverse group of people. I do apologise for herding a massive cohort of individuals into a single category, but I myself am a millennial, so I kind of feel like I can get away with it, so I'm just going to push ahead. And with that, here are my interviews with Katie Acheson and Evan Goodman. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
The definition of a millennial varies depending on which website you visit or article you read. Can you tell us, is there an agreed definition of a millennial?
Oh, look, everybody has their things, and especially if it serves a purpose to extend it, they'll extend it. But generally, it's about what we used to call Gen Y. So millennial is probably between 1981 and 1996, so 22-year-olds to 37-year-olds. But I think the way that we talk about it in the media is all young people, and that's not necessarily true. So 22 to 37-year-olds is probably about right.
Okay, so it is a much broader bracket than people might think. Can you tell us, in general terms, what is it that a millennial is looking for in a career?
Well, not shockingly, I think it's, being able to be part of something that they believe in, having a job where they feel like they can actually succeed and grow in that, which is, I think every generation's had that. But millennials have had a really different experience than their parents and particularly their grandparents. And so there's a lot of studies going into what makes millennials happy, and Deloitte have done actually a really good job of interviewing millennials around the world. And what they found is actually to get loyalty from millennial, they like pay. They say that they want pay, but actually what keeps them in your workplace is inclusion, inclusive workplaces or diverse workplaces, and flexibility. So creating jobs where they have the opportunity to see lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds and work together with them, and also the flexibility around hours and the way that the job is set up is actually a large part of what they want.
Okay, and I want to follow up on inclusion. That could be quite a variable term for a lot of businesses and people. What does that look like day to day?
So that's probably about an inclusive workplace. So that means that there are people from lots of different backgrounds. So that might be from different cultures, it might be different religions, also with different levels of ability. So I think workplaces these days aren't just a generic place where you see one person and they all the workers look the same. Young people want to know that when they go into a workplace, they're going to be around people who are going to challenge them to be different and to do bigger and greater things. And young people realise that comes from having people around who don't think the same way that you do and have different experiences. And so they really value that, which is really exciting, I think.
I agree. And to be honest, I think that all sounds pretty reasonable. Like I think most of us would want to achieve such things from our work. What do you think we're hearing so many stories of a disconnect between businesses and their millennial employees?
Maybe it's just a generational thing. I think often a a business could be run by somebody who isn't a millennial. There are a lot of people who've been working for quite a while, and the future is different now than it was then. So young people or millennials have a very different experience. So where their parents might have had one or two careers in their life and their grandparents probably had one job, or throughout their lives, millennials will have 5 different careers and 17 different jobs at the minimum. So they know that the workplace is very different, that they're going to move and they're going to have to change and grow and adapt. And the Industrial Revolution, or the next revolution, their 4.0 that they're calling it now, with the gig economy and digitalization, automation of the workplace, young people's experiences of work is very different than their parents. They know that they could be working with somebody in a global context, sitting in their room, or they might be working from home, whereas their parents probably didn't have those options. So I think it's a very different place, and maybe sometimes the disconnect between an employer and employee when it comes to a millennial is just a generational understanding.
You mentioned something there that I wanted to touch on, the tendency for millennials to change careers, and perhaps unfairly or fairly, depending on your point of view, they are kind of characterized as job hoppers. Why do they have such a tendency to want to move around in a job and change careers completely?
Oh, I think it's twofold. I think first of all, the casualization of the workforce. So many jobs these days are part-time or casual jobs or contract jobs. So they might look like they're jumping around, but actually they have limited options. So they had an option to get a part-time job, and it's not paying the bill. So when they get an option to find a full-time job, they need to do that to be able to pay their rent. And for any listeners out there who are living in Sydney, they understand that housing affordability is a major, major issue for many young people, but particularly those in metro areas. It is really hard to be able to just pay your rent, let alone save for the future. And the option of buying a house for many young people isn't even something they dream about. They just want to be able to pay their bills. So I think it's twofold. It's about whether the options they have, and I also think young people have a lot more opportunities in the sense of, and the expectation of that if you want to grow in an area and a skill and you're in a job that you can't do that, then they'll look for other opportunities, which might make them seem like they're hopping, but actually what they're looking for is skill development. And it might be more about businesses not really providing that to their employees. So maybe if we started looking at what they wanted in their jobs, they might have option to stay for longer.
I just want to touch on that. You mentioned skill development being a really important part of millennials' day-to-day work and what they're looking to get out of their job and their career. What are some of the tangible changes that a small business could make to facilitate that for a millennial employee?
I think thinking about skills. What does this job currently give you? What are the options for your employee to grow in their knowledge and their skills? And having conversations really early on with your employees about what it is that they want in their careers and their lives, and what the options are that you can kind of help them to get to that place. So many young people, and particularly millennials, really feel like they're not prepared for the work of the future. School is really far behind and giving soft skills and some of those communication skills that are really core, that young people know are going to be core to the future of work, and they don't feel prepared. And so they're really looking to businesses to help prepare them. But I think somewhere about 10 or 15 years ago, we stopped really thinking about professional development because of the pressures on businesses to kind of have high outputs. And, you know, it's a hard world out there that people are dealing with trying to keep a business running. And so the focus on developing your staff has kind of sort of slipped away. And I think actually what keeps millennials there is they say that they have opportunities and the desire to build those skills. So it's really worth investing in the time and energy into those employees. They might not stay for 20 years like they used to, but those 5 years that you get from them when you are investing in them will definitely pay off for your business.
Are there any businesses out there that are doing a particularly good job of this? Anyone that you're aware of who have a good engagement plan with their millennial workforce in terms of recruitment, attraction, retention, that kind of thing?
Oh, look, I think the tech companies have been ahead of this for a really long time. Google, everyone knows that if you go to Google, you can have a ball pit and there's a slide, there's cafes, there's a gym, there's ping pong tables. A lot of the sort of shared spaces and the flexible spaces these days have a lot of options like a coffee machine or a barista who's there. And I think it's that flexible workplace that they're really tapping into, that young people want to have a work-life balance, and that your work can be part of that. You can have balance balance in your workplace. So there's innovation spaces and ways of thinking differently. And, it's not just about a ping pong table, but everybody loves ping pong at lunch. I know at my workplace, we do the crossword, which might seem like 1950s, but actually have people as young as 19 in my team and people as old as 40 in my team, and we all really enjoy it. It's one of those things about just making sure that people feel valued and that they know that they're part of a bigger team. And I think the tech companies do it better with money-wise, but I think any business can look at how can we create a inclusive space where people are seen more than a robot and they're seen to be part of building something and that they can connect with other people. It's really important. So, anybody can do it. We just have a subscription to Sydney Morning Herald and we do a crossword. So that's our way of doing it. But maybe a ping pong table, maybe it's about picnics. It's just about creating flexibility. And, the best people to come up with those ideas are millennials themselves.
Okay, so maybe ask the question, what do you want to do at work? What are the kind of fun things that will make you stick around for next to 1, 2, 3, 5 years?
Absolutely. People ask me all the time, what do young people want? I'm like, you know what, the best thing, what they want is for you to ask them. So just go ahead when you hire somebody, ask them, what would you like this workplace to be like? Don't be scared of what they say. Like, you might not be able to put a ball pit in your foyer, but maybe there's something that you can do that they think of that's going to make your business so much more interesting and profitable, not only for you, but for the whole team.
And just to be clear, we're not necessarily endorsing ball pits and pool tables and indoor slides and all that sort of stuff. It can be very simple changes that businesses can make to engage a younger workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. Some places have whiteboards as a wall and they have creative spaces, and so people can kind of take time out to think creatively. It might be about sort of doing a regular activity with the team that's outside of your normal workspace that is, like just go for a walk or look around the area. There's some really great volunteer programs. So some of the big banks, they'll let their employees have a paid day of work volunteering for community organisations, and that's another way of really showing value to the community and value to your staff to recognise that they want to do other things other than work, and you get paid for it. So those sort of things, all of those things work. I think it's about, for businesses, working out what they can afford, what resources they have, and thinking outside of the box. And millennials are fantastic about thinking outside of the box. So make them the social coordinator or the creative person. Give them a title and let them go run free.
That is really great advice, and something that I think all of us can think of is, rather than how can we impose roles and positions and job descriptions on millennials, what do you think millennials can actually bring to a workplace?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think a lot of people are moving to outcomes based. Young people as a whole are really interested in social justice. It's a defining characteristic of millennials is that they're very compassionate. They have so much access to technology and they see around the world inequalities and what needs to happen, and they feel very strongly about issues. And so there's no reason why a workplace can't be one where people can express themselves beyond just the actual work or the tangible work. It's about outcomes. How is the business going to make the world a better place? And the more young people feel like the business is invested in the world and making it a more equal place, the more likely they're to invest their time and energy in you as well. So I think it's really good for businesses to start asking the questions of their staff. What do you want us to look like? Because in the midst of that, your employee happiness scale will go up, and I think also your profit margins will get bigger because people are invested in doing things outside of the box, and you might think of new marketplaces that you hadn't thought of before because you're listening to your staff and they're thinking in a different way than you are.
So there actually can be a business benefit to investing in young workers, not necessarily a cost, but it can actually drive leads and increase the bottom line. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I think Apple has based their whole market strategy on that. Most of their new products come from team creative times, and so they'll think outside. They don't just have one product line. They're always working on a number of different ones, and they're letting their teams and staff think differently so that to see whether they can create new market spaces. And so I think it's when we try to put young people, particularly millennials, as workers in a box, what you're going to do is see a shorter time with them because they're not going to feel as included. And it's very important for them to feel like they're being part of the change that's happening in the world and part of the change that's happening in the business. So allowing them to have that sense of ownership along with you in your business can be really profitable.
So the spectrum of what businesses can do to engage and retain a millennial employee or an entire millennial workforce is quite broad. If you're a small business, where should you start?
I think start by looking for young people where they're at. So social media is one of those places that I think everybody realizes that millennials live in the digital world. So finding out the kind of people, deciding what you want, and then going to the places that they are. I think sometimes we go to the old ways of working to try to find stuff. You can actually just put on a Facebook group like, hey, this is the thing I'm looking for. Do you know anybody? And people will share it, and then you'll get content. Making videos about what you do and engaging them in a visual way, it also works really well. It's about thinking about it differently. What exactly is it that you want? And then going to them where they're at rather than expecting that they'll come to you.
Before I let you go, I want to ask one more question that's not at all related to millennials, but I think might be of interest to our listeners. Tell me, what is the best piece of business advice you've ever received and why?
Oh, that's a great question. I think know who you're talking to. So whether it's the audience that you're trying to pitch something to, or the how you're running your team, or when you're going to a bank and you're asking for a loan, is actually doing a bit of research. One of the great things about the world today is we have everything at our fingertips. You can find out so much about people just by Googling. And so it's so important to kind of work out who are these people, what are their intentions and motivations, and how can I meet their needs by having this conversation with them. And because of that, I think personally, I found that my organisation has really excelled and succeeded because we've got to know our audiences, and we really respect and treat them well. We treat them with the respect that they deserve, and we try to make sure that what we say is true all the time. And when we do something that's wrong, we tell them that we did something is wrong. And I think because of that, people trust us. And so it is really about knowing what works for your audiences, no matter what it is, whether it's in a business case or your staff or just people in general. I think it's, do a little bit of research before you start talking.
Katie, we love what Youth Action is doing in the youth space. Where can we learn more about you and your work?
Well, it's Youth Action, and so you can Google us, but we're all over the place. So we have lots of different platforms that we kind of engage with, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, or our website.
Where all engaged millennials are found.
Yeah, exactly. We try to just make sure that we kind of touch base with everybody at all sort of points. But our website is youthaction.org.au, and it's a good place to start and finding out about what we do. But the best way I find is pick up the phone and give us a call if you have some questions or some thoughts. I'm always happy to help and connect you with talking to young people directly.
Katie, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to the show. We're joined now by Evan Goodman, serial entrepreneur, business coach and mentor, who's here to tell us about what small businesses can do to manage millennial employees. Evan, welcome to you.
Thank you for the opportunity of having me on, Lee.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges facing small businesses that millennial workers may not be aware of?
Yes, I've been fortunate enough for the last few years, up until very recently, to, besides coaching, to have the opportunity to lecture at university in leadership and management. And certain issues always come up with students, and in particular this issue I'm going to address now with my first year students who are 17, 18 years old and going into the workforce for the first time. And one of the things that they find confronting is when they get to a job is there seems to be a them versus us mentality against them, the young new people to the workforce, against the SME owner. And I guess the challenge for the small business owner when he's employing young people is to really make them understand why they want them on board, and that it's not an exploitative process, but really a needs basis. I guess it's also very important for young people to understand that small business people have a lot at risk. In other words, business owners often give a lot up to have their business, be it buying a new motor car, going on holiday with their kids. And they often have to borrow money. Their houses stand security for their business. So there's a lot riding on it for them. And often young people coming into the business don't have an appreciation or understanding what's at stake. And they don't see it, and it's not explained to them. So I'd say the two challenges that I'm identifying, the first one is business people talk to the young people and explain why they want it and why they need it. And secondly, without putting them under too much pressure, explain to them what's at stake for yourself.
I know a lot of your work focuses on culture and the values of the organisation. Would that be a way for senior management and millennial workers to overcome that us versus them mentality?
I'm not so sure I'll address the values piece right now, but certainly in terms of this gap you're referring to, I'd say that business owners, or small business owner in particular, have to understand that people coming into the workforce today don't have this, I don't know, call it an older mindset that this is going to be the one and only job. I think statistics demonstrate that the average person coming into the workforce today is going to have 6 or 7 jobs. And I think business owners have to expect that, and they have to realize that's something they're going to have to work around. That doesn't mean that they have to take the approach they don't believe the same commitment isn't there, because people are not going to spend their whole lives in one job, because it is. I guess around expectation, the 3 big things I would highlight that come out of, again, feedback from my students is firstly around CSR, which is corporate social responsibility. Students, young people coming into the workforce expect their employers to be mindful around things like global warming, welfare issues, and sustainability, animal rights. And even though they understand that the company can't fully commit to this, there is an expectation that they're mindful around these issues. The second thing that I get feedback on is that young people appreciate flexibility, how they work, when they work. And the third and most important thing, very important, is that young people today, unlike perhaps previous generations of people coming to the workforce, they want to do work that they can see value in. They don't just want to be given a task. They don't just want to be given a job. They want to be given something where the contribution can be appreciated and that they can get value and learning out of it.
What are some of the successful strategies you've seen in managers and millennials coming together to tackle a work-related project?
Thank you for throwing me an easy question, because I'm quite clear on this one, Lee. I'd say that, again, 3 things. The first one, get young people involved in the decision-making process. Get them genuinely involved and indicate to them that you want them there. The second thing is give them a voice in the process. Once they're at the table, you've got to listen to them, hear what they've got to say. And lastly, give them responsibility. Their jobs have to have a meaning, and they have to be accountable for the work that they accept to do.
Evan, you've given us 3 pieces of advice there that are really practical and wonderful takeaways for small business. For a small business owner or employer who hasn't done this before, who hasn't tried to involve a millennial in those key business decisions and conversations, what's the first step? How do you open that door?
That is a good question. And I guess there are many ways of answering it. Going to a very practical solution, I would probably look at the interview and the onboarding process. And even that word onboarding, a lot of small businesses actually don't know what it means. Basically means is have the processes in place that when somebody starts with you, they know what to do and you know what to show them. I think that the whole process around that hiring process, the whole hiring process, when I hear students talk about it, they are exceptionally frustrated by it because they get to a job and they're thrown into the deep end. When I talk to small business people about it, they're frustrated that they expect people to have better skills when they come out of college, TAFE, or have matriculated. And I would say out of all the issues that I hear from both sides, that is probably one that is common to both of them consistently. And I would encourage small business people to have a very solid onboarding process in place, and bearing in mind if they can reflect on the time when they started working, because what they went through is the same what people go through today, namely that it's quite a scary and intimidating process. And if you can make sure that when somebody comes on board your company, that there's a certain level of comfort and support you can give them, I reckon that would be the first step.
It sounds almost like there is that mismatch in expectations, and there is almost a step being missed, perhaps. Would that be fair to say that millennials are coming in not sure of what's expected of them, and their employers are hiring them expecting more from day one? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. It's absolutely fair to say. And business leaders, particularly of small business people, and small business being defined as people with under 20 employees, don't have the luxury of often training people correctly. The training process, the explanation process, the introducing what does it mean to be as part of a team. So they give a very quick overview of what's expected, and they move on to the next job. In the meantime, the young person who's new to the job is almost disenfranchised, feels demotivated when they can't do the job properly. And that in turn sets up this whole process where the owner thinks the staff member doesn't know what they're doing. The staff member, being young, is too intimidated to ask, or has a fear of sounding silly or stupid by asking the wrong questions. And then you have this process recurring over and over, with both parties becoming dissatisfied with each other.
But that can be a really simple fix, can't it? Just having a clearer onboarding program and taking that time to invest. If it could be a day or even just a few hours to do that onboarding properly, it can really harness great benefits for the business.
Yes, it's almost a hindsight issue. In hindsight, it's easy to fix, and the problem seems fixable. But small businesses don't understand that process because they haven't been involved with it. Majority of small businesses start as a one-man operation, grow to two. Often the people they're bringing them part-time, so the job is very specific, so real onboarding isn't required. Then as they grow, they simply don't know what they don't know. And then you have the situation where this frustration seeps into the process.
Okay, Evan, so the small business has recruited a younger worker. They've introduced an onboarding program. Tell us a little bit about the day-to-day strategies that an employer can use in managing a millennial worker.
So the day-to-day strategies for me as a business coach are very much about practical issues. So I'm going to sort of, if you don't mind me, sidestep the question a tiny bit and go, instead of looking at it in a micro view, look at a more macro view. And for me, what is critically important is this whole aspect around values that I think you may have alluded to earlier. And management and small businesses needs to have a set of values. Now, what are values? And from my perspective, they are the rules that dictate how you conduct yourself in your business. In other words, how do we conduct ourselves? And the beauty about values is that they're very intrinsic. So they're aspirational because people want to have a strong sense of values. They also very understandable. Nobody doesn't understand what values means to themselves or other people. But the other beautiful thing about values is that you tend to be quite respectful of people's values. Even though their values might not be as high a priority as yours or vice versa, you're always respectful of them. And I think that for people joining a business, short-term, long-term, young people, old people, is absolutely critical that they've got those guidelines. For young people specifically, I think it sets a great example that they can actually see other people demonstrate and live their values. And that in itself, there's a lot of learning around that. And values is a stepping stone to creating a good culture. And when people understand that interconnection, not only does it benefit the company, which it does, not only does it benefit the individual and the team, but that person goes to the next job. Bearing in mind that people are swapping jobs rather frequently, they take that good culture to another job and they can impart that knowledge over there.
So values are perhaps something that not every small business has the time or resourcing to set aside and fully explore. Can you tell us a little bit about why they should do that? What are the tangible benefits of taking that time to come up with a solid framework for what you stand for and how you want to conduct your business?
You're discussing a topic that's very dear to my heart. And I always find it very interesting when I ask clients what their values are. And they really struggle with this, which is both always a surprise to me and to them, because you live your values the whole time. And yet when you're asked to identify them, people really struggle with them. So from a coaching perspective, there are two types of values. There's the private and personal values, which you have around family, around partners, around friends. And then you have a business value. And they are in most cases separate. And the key with the values, besides what I mentioned before, them being a guide on how we conduct ourselves with regards to our colleagues, with our suppliers, our customers, because it sets a tone and it creates a framework. It's also very important, though, that everybody understands the meaning of the values. In other words, if we were to take a word like respect, respect has a different meaning for an older person, maybe compared to a 15-year-old. Now, they both appreciate and understand respect from their own perspective. So it's absolutely critical that the company or the business has a story around that value, and it's identifiable, and they can show examples of good values and bad values. Because if that isn't well explained, then people will bring their own understanding to the table, which is not the intent. So coming back to your question, Lee, yes, clients, particularly my clients, are right from the get-go taught to reflect and think about their values. Importantly, to understand what they are and what they mean. And generally speaking, once they realize this, also the realization they actually haven't thought about it, it actually becomes quite a nice exercise to be able to enunciate them and to lay them down as a platform. Older people might know you used to be able to walk into a reception of a company and see a mission statement and a value statement on the walls, but it actually meant nothing. And when you asked the staff, they couldn't repeat it back and they didn't know what it meant. So I'm not talking about it in that flippant manner. I'm talking about it, values as being a real explored topic, and business owners having a real understanding. And then, of course, a key function of leadership is to go out and spread the message over and over and over.
We're witnessing at the moment a dramatic shift in the Australian workforce. More millennials are entering the workforce, and we've seen the statistics that by 2025 they will account for 75% of the Australian workforce. Why is it so important for the future of Australian business that we start to adapt to this shift?
Well, I look at this perhaps from a different light, and I see the importance sitting not so much around the work that we do as from a respect perspective. And what I mean by this is that smaller business, who I guess I'm representing here today, can sometimes come across a bit autocratic. And they've got so much at stake that sometimes there's a sense of having to tell or instruct people how to do their work, because in their mind they have this notion or idea of how it should be performed, rightly or wrongly. That said, people coming into the workforce have their own ideas and preconceptions about the business. And I think this respect part is critical moving forward, because if there's a better understanding and the expectations are cleared up, I think people can work better. And when people can work better, that flows through to all the different sectors of the business. I hope that answers your question in a roundabout sort of way.
It does. It's a wonderful insight. And to be honest, we could probably talk about this for hours, and unfortunately we don't have that luxury of time. Something else I am curious to talk to you about is we've taken a close look at some of the positive things that a millennial worker can bring to a small business. Can you tell us a little bit about what a small business can do for a millennial worker and their career?
That's a great question, Lee. I think at the heart of their businesses and their mindset, small business people genuinely want growth, whether it be growth in their own business, growth for themselves, growth for the community. They also want to help young people who they employ to grow. I think that's a given, certainly for the clients that I work with. And the two areas where I think that they could do it and they could offer a lot of value to a new employee is, number one, the opportunity to work in a team and all that encompasses vigorous debate, discussions, the learning, the responsibility, but that just whole environment of being part of something bigger than yourself. And those opportunities don't always come along in a small business because of the nature of a small business and the urgency of work that has to be done. But it's a learning part for both. It's for the owner to be able to get the teams working and for the people in the teams to understand the real concept of the teamwork. And the second thing, the really important thing that applies to this question you asked and just to small business leadership generally, is really the ability to listen, but to truly listen and added to that in a non-judgmental fashion. People, when they are listened to, they will be willing to open up, they'll be willing to discuss, and problem solving becomes easier, and the relationship gets stronger. But it is hard to do, and it is something that requires time and patience by both sides, the learning on the business side and the patience on the employee side, but it is a tremendous and wonderful skill to have.
Evan, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us. Before I let you go, I ask this question of all of my guests. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received and why?
I love the question. I guess I know the answer. I'm very clear of the answer. My hesitation is I've actually never publicly said it because it's quite an internal, intrinsic driver for me.
So we're getting a world first scoop here.
Yeah. I don't remember the circumstances, but I do recall I was a young bloke, 10, 12 years old, and I suspect the situation was around some type of negotiation or bargaining where there was an exchange of goods. And I remember my dad saying to me that when you go into this transaction, ask yourself this one question: is it fair for all concerned? And it has always stuck with me. And to this day, I can say with complete honesty, whenever I go into a transaction, whatever it is, I always ask myself, is it fair for both parties?
I think that's a wonderful question, and all of us could benefit from asking that question from our businesses and in our personal lives. Evan, thank you so much for your time. If we did want to learn more about you and your work, where can we find you?
Well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity. It's been lovely meeting and speaking to you. With regards to finding me, I'm on evangoodman.com or simply Google Business Coach Evan Goodman.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the show. Joining us now to discuss the national minimum wage and penalty rate changes is Employsure's employment relations expert, Thorin Arnadaughter. Thorin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me here today.
Firstly, can you walk us through the changes to the national minimum wage?
Certainly. So every year from the 1st of July, the wage obligations for employers change. And this year it was announced that the national minimum wage would increase by 3.5%. Changing the minimum rate from $18.29 to $18.93 per hour. This is payable to permanent adult employees not covered by an award. The percentage increase also applies across all modern awards. So for those covered by an award or an agreement, the rates will generally be higher and they will need to implement changes as well. But the rates will differ depending on the industry of the business and the occupation of the employee.
So can you break that down for us? What's the impact of these new rates on Australian businesses?
Well, this is the highest increase we've seen in a long time. So business owners operating on tight margins are left, perhaps feeling the pressure around altering their books or rethinking their business models. There's also pressure to get everything in order and ready to implement the pay changes, as from the first full pay period in July, businesses are required to implement the new rates to ensure they are compliant. So for a lot of businesses, rolling out the new rates can be stressful just due to the Fair Work system, which can be quite difficult to navigate. But it's important to make the changes, as falling behind or choosing not to implement the changes can expose a business to underpayment claims or compliance audits.
Obviously, underpayment is a big issue in the media right now. What are some of the consequences employers can face if they're found not paying staff at the correct rates?
There's a number of consequences that can arise, a big one being media exposure, which can impact the reputation of a business. The Fair Work Ombudsman often update the news tabs with stories of non-compliance and penalties imposed, naming and shaming businesses to affirm their position on paying correctly. But typically an employer faced with an underpayment claim will have to spend time away from the business in mediation or the courts, which can be costly in a variety of ways. Employers may also be required to pay back all wages owed to employees, And the courts may impose hefty penalties for each breach identified. In addition to this, workplace morale and trust between employees can be tested and union pressures can escalate.
A lot for business owners to think about. Let's move on to penalty rates, which also changed on July 1. What were the changes?
So from the 1st of July, Sunday rates for employees in certain industries such as retail, hospitality, pharmacy and fast food will reduce further from last year's penalty reduction to close out the differences in rates payable on Saturdays and Sundays. These reductions will take place progressively each year until the full penalty reduction is rolled out by 2020.
So can you tell us, what does this actually mean for small businesses?
So for small businesses, it's a good idea to identify what modern award they come under and have a look at the new rates, see whether, those Sunday rate penalty reductions will apply to them.
Obviously, those employers operating within those industries may get a little bit of relief, but the minimum wage certainly adds a little bit more financial pressure, doesn't it?
The penalty rate changes are certainly a welcome change for those operating on weekends. However, considering the pressures on businesses to remain competitive, particularly with larger entities and those that are able to extend their operating hours or trade online, the wage increases can certainly be viewed as a sting to the budget. For some business owners, it can be a case of digging deeper into their own pockets to pay up extra wages or rethinking whether there's a need to restructure or cut costs. These rates are adjusted every year though, so they're there to keep up with living costs. So unfortunately, it is an unavoidable action that needs to be taken.
This is a complex system Australian businesses are operating in. What's your advice to them to help them manage these changes?
It's a good idea to become familiar with where to look and how to apply entitlements. I would recommend taking steps to identify if an award or enterprise agreement covers your business, so you know where to look for employee entitlements. Allocating pay grades to each employee based on their job, so you can identify what pay rate applies. Identifying if penalties, allowances, overtime and loadings may apply to employees. And the not so fun but essential part is document everything, including pay slips, mutual agreements and time records. As a business owner, it's ever so important you get it right from the beginning to set yourself up for success. I believe if you get it right and have nothing to worry about, you can focus on your other passions and areas for growth.
Well, that's it for the first episode of the Better Business Podcast. A huge thanks again to our special guests, Katie Acheson, Evan Goodman and Thorin Anadaughter. If you need any help with workplace and industrial relations or just have a question about your obligations as an employer, visit us at employsure.com.au. I'm your host, Lee Johnston. Tune in again next month when we tackle another big issue in small business.